Hello everyone, today is our last lecture and I feel sad because of that, but I know that you are so happy that it's your last lecture. So anyway, I hope that you will enjoy this video, and this lecture is for our 21st of May and till 28th of May, so just today. Although today is a holiday, but I want you to be well prepared for your exam. That's why I'm sending you this video lesson. So today's lesson is about Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I think that you have heard about him, and maybe you have some information about this novel. It's really interesting novel, and we have three main contents according to our syllabi. The first one is Oscar Wilde as one of the main figures of 19th century English literature. And the second topic is about the main themes, like the purpose of art, the supremacy of use and beauty, the negative consequence of influence, etc., in The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. And the last topic is about the analysis of characters, motifs, and symbols, and also I will tell you about the literary elements of this novel. So let's get started. And okay. So, Oscar Wilde was an Irish poet and playwright, and after writing in different forms throughout the 1880s, the early 1890s, saw him become one of the most popular playwrights in London. And he's best remembered for his epigrams and plays, and his novel, most famous novel, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Maybe you have watched the film of this novel, but be aware that the film and the novel, they're not so similar. They have some differences between book and the film. But of course, they have several similar scenes that you can watch it just for enjoying. And the Picture of Dorian Gray, written in 1889. So it was Oscar Wilde's first novel, and a fashion story of a man who trades the purity of his soul for undying use. So I would like just to give you general information about the novel and about the main character, Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray was the young man, and he was so poor with his appearance and also his character. But he has some influencers like Lord Henry, and he was symbolizing devil. And also he had another relationship with Basil, who was a famous artist in that period, and he drew Dorian Gray's picture because he just fell in love with this man. And this book was forbidden because of this inverted male relationship. So Basil was a male and Dorian Gray was so that he fell in love with Dorian Gray, and then the first step that changed Dorian Gray to the other character. And then he becomes to be an artist that he loved together. He fell in love with himself, his beauty, his appearance. And Lord Henry was symbolizing devil in the human appearance, and he influenced to Dorian Gray that you are beautiful, so you are handsome, and you can use this beauty with stealing a woman's heart and stealing humans' heart, changing their lives, and blah blah blah. So such kind of things, such kind of let's say quotes can make Dorian change from inside and outside. And also we have some mysteries in this novel. You can see it from the changing of the portrait, but not changing of Dorian. So it's all, of course, it's impossible, but it was a mystery of the novel, and it was like the symbol of the novel that the picture of Dorian Gray was symbolizing his inside. And if you change your character to the bad side, so although your appearance is good, you can affect people's life badly. So this symbolizing this idea. The picture of Dorian Gray symbolizes this idea. And so this is the Gothic and philosophical novel by Oscar Wilde, first published complete in the July 1890. And fearing the story was indecent, the magazine's editor deleted roughly 500 words before publication without Wilde's knowledge. And despite that censorship, the picture of Dorian Gray offended the moral sensibilities of British book reviewers. And some of whom said that Oscar Wilde merited persecution for violating the laws guarding public morality. And in response, Wilde aggressively defended his novel and art in correspondence with the British press, although he personally made excisions of some of the most controversial material when revising and lengthening the story for book publication the following years. And so as a literature of the 19th century, the picture of Dorian Gray pivots of a Gothic plot device with strong themes interpreted from Faust. And the main themes, let's talk about the main themes. Appearance versus reality. And I talked about this theme just a little, appearance and reality. And you can say, of course, appearance and character, inner character. So outside and inside of human. You can name it however you want. And throughout this brief philosophical novel, Wilde explores the questions of what is real, what is appearance, and what matters most. He does this in a number of ways. The first and most central, of course, is the core detail of the story, the magical portrait of Dorian Gray. As I said before, it's a mysterious thing that the portrait is just changing day by day, but Dorian, even after a while, many years, he is the same. Everyone got older, but he didn't change. So it's the mysterious, the magical side of the novel. It begins as the young man's perfect likeness and the greatest work of Basil Hallward's artistic career. At the moment it's first displayed, appearance and reality are synchronized, at least for Dorian and those around him. However, they begin to diverge as soon as Lord Henry awakens Dorian. So the awakening is just in brackets. It's not awakening, it's just influence. Bad influence on Dorian Gray. And Dorian just started to change his character, and although he loves Sybil Wayne, he he stole her heart, and that girl's life ends with a tragedy. She just committed suicide because of Dorian. But actually, before Lord Henry's influence, Dorian fell in love with Sybil Wayne. But after Lord Henry's influence, he totally changed, and that was the result of Sybil Wayne's death. And since Basil is a painter, his artistic calling is an ongoing reflection on the relationship between appearance and reality. So, Sybil Vane is a great love of Dorian's life, and her brief professional career as an actress is devoted to appearing to be something other than what she is. That's who she is, and paradoxically, it's close to her essence. Before Dorian, she was killed at acting because she believed love had no place in her life. Once Dorian changed her reality through loving her, she can no longer counterfeit the characters she used to play so well. And the second theme is about art and life. So this novel, we can say that it's there is intermediality in this novel. So the painting and writing, they are together. So they are double goer in this novel, because we look through all of the novel according to the painting of Dorian Gray, and we analyze the painting according to the writing of the author. And closely related to the theme of appearance versus reality is the theme of art versus life. And this theme is more complicated, though, as one's appearance can be a simple lie, an accident, or an illusion, whereas art is something more. But let's say that appearance is not artificial, but art is artificial. Appearance is real, but art is artificial. Appearance is made by, let's say, godness power, but art is made by the human. So, art for Wilde requires style, conscious display, and an elevated aesthetic quality. It should be beautiful. When Sybil loses her artistic ability due to Dorian's love, she then loses Dorian. This makes it immediately clear that Dorian loved her in part because of her art. So Dorian liked her artificialness, not just reality. That's why in this novel, art and reality, art and life just have some diversity. Take away that art, as Dorian did, and the reason for Dorian to love Sybil disappears. Lord Henry also argues fairly consistently for the power and superiority of art. When Sybil Vane dies, he urged Dorian to think of her death as a strange lyric fragment from some Jacobean tragedy. And Dorian accepts this guidance, and he allows Henry to steer him away from mourning and back to pleasure. Art then consoles in this novel just as it reshapes reality. And reputation with character. So, reputation is the story others tell about a person. Character is that person's real nature. The picture of Dorian Gray examines what happens when the two diverge. Wilde also casts an interesting and insightful light on how people judge these attributes. Once Dorian starts to indulge himself, many people hear stories about him. In a sense, his reputation precedes him. These stories are not good and would ruin anyone else socially. However, because those around him believe one's character affects one's features, anyone who sees Dorian rejects these stories because of his pleasing physical appearance. They take the proof their own eyes, offer them over the stories they hear, no matter how lurid or often repeated. And pleasure versus virtue. Pleasure takes many forms in this novel: art, beauty, so intimacy, and drugs. Wilde explores pleasure's temptation and its relationship to virtue. Though it's never made explicit in the best-known version of this novel, one of the main pleasures that's everywhere implied is inverted male relationship desire. So both Basil and Lord Henry admire Dorian's beauty openly and for an extended time. Their gazes linger in ways that are too possessive and erotic for them simply to be a shared love of abstract beauty. And Dorian can manipulate them, especially Basil, and Basil is jealous of Dorian spending time with others, responds more aligned with romantic love than with abstract apprenticeship. So because of this inverted male relationship, were illegal in this period. That's why this novel was forbidden, like The Catcher in the Rear by Salinger. Maybe you know this novel. So in that novel also they have the inverted male relationship between the historian teacher and the student. Because of that scene, that novel was forbidden, and like this novel. So for that period it was illegal, and before the story appeared in Le Pincot's monthly magazine, it was revised to make its intimacy content less overt. And the conflict between pleasure and virtue also appears in other ways. Ways that really show how dark Dorian's character becomes in the novel. Because at the beginning of the novel it was so bright, he was so poor with his beauty and with his appearance and also character. But the chapter by chapter we can see how he changes. So the opening scene of chapter 9 was may illustrate this most clearly. It's the morning after Sybil has killed herself. Basil visits Dorian to check on him and make sure he's okay. Dorian is completely superficial and ready to gossip about the lightest social affairs because of Lord Henry's influence. His willingness to focus on his pleasure, so soon after his loss horrifies Basil. And even Basil can see that it's not the same person that he drew the picture. Even chapter 9, Basil can see that from the beginning of the novel, Dorian Grey was so poor, and now he changed totally. And the negative consequence of influence. So this influence is about Lord Henry's influence, of course. The painting and the Yellow Book have a profound effect on Dorian, influencing him to predominantly immoral behavior over the course of nearly 2 decades. Reflecting on Dorian's power over Basil and deciding that he would like to seduce Dorian in much the same way, Lord Henry points out that there is something terribly enthralling in the exercise of influence. Falling under the sway of such influence is perhaps unavoidable, but the novel ultimately censors the sacrifice of oneself to another. Basil's idolatry of Dorian leads to his murder, and Dorian's devotion to Lord Henry's hedonism and the Yellow Book precipitate his own downfall. It's little wonder in a novel that prizes individualism, the uncompromised expression of self, that the sacrifice of oneself, whether it be to another person or to a work of art, leads to one's destruction. And the supremacy of youth and beauty, it's another theme of this novel. So Lord Henry claims to value beauty and youth above all else. It's his belief, when imparted to Dorian, that drives the protagonist to make the wish that ultimately damns him. When Dorian realizes that he will keep his youthful appearance regardless of whatever immoral actions he indulges in, he considers himself free of the moral constraints faced by ordinary men. He values his physical appearance more than the state of his soul, which is openly displayed by the ever-increasing degradation of the portrait. This superficial faith in the ultimate value of use and beauty is therefore the driving mechanism behind the protagonist's damnation. In this way, the picture of Dorian Gray may be read as a moralistic tale, warning against the dangers of valuing one's appearance too highly and of neglecting one's conscience. It's important to bear in mind that the beauty that Dorian incessantly pursues is a beauty defined by a purely artistic sensibility as opposed to a humanitarian one. When faced with the news of his fiancée's suicide, Sybil Wane's suicide, Dorian views the event as satisfyingly melodramatic. His obsession with aesthetic beauty prevents Dorian from attending to the pangs of his own conscience. And the last theme is about the purpose of art. So we see that it's a picture of Dorian Gray, and Basil was an artist, and also Sybil Wynne was an actress. So we can see this intermediality in all chapters of this novel. If you don't know what is intermediality, I will explain you with another, according to another heading of the lesson. I can explain you just with in chatting on WhatsApp or Edmodo. It's up to you. If you don't know what's intermediality, actually it's the technique of postmodernism. But although Oscar Wilde didn't write in a postmodern literature, but you can find some elements of it. Intermediality always was existed in literature. When two types of art, they are going they are double goer in the novel. Like here, the picture of Dorian Gray. It's the art, painting, and theater, and inside of the writing. So it's intermediality. And also Somerset Maugham, theater. It's also intermediality. It's theater and novel together. So you can maybe you have read many novels in this context, but you didn't realize that it's intermediality or not. So if you are interested in this technique, I can explain you on WhatsApp or on Edmodo. So just make me be aware of it. So the theme is exemplified by the titular portrait. Dorian Gray's image reflects his conscience and his true self and serves as a mirror of his soul. So this fact echoes Wilde's statement that it's the spectator that art really mirrors. However, this theme first appears earlier in the preface, with Wilde's contention that the 19th century dislike of realism is the rage of Caliban seeing his own face in a glass. Realism is a genre of artistic expression that is said to have shown the 19th century its own reflection. The fear that Dorian expresses when viewing the painting and the emotion that he seeks to escape through sin, drug addiction, and even murder might be considered an expression of his rage at laying eyes upon his true self. The idea of reflectivity also recalls a major mythical influence on the novel, the story of Narcissus. Dorian, like Narcissus, falls in love with his own image and is ultimately destroyed by it. So you can find the elements of mythology in this novel too. I don't know if you know about the myth of Narcissus or not, but you have to read it. It's so little, not long. I can send you. I will make here for myself to send you the myth of the story of Narcissus. Even you can, maybe you have seen the cartoon of Narcissus. I said before, if you remember at the beginning of the term, I said to you, if you want to analyze well the novels, you should know, maybe you have read it from the World Literature 1. Because in World Literature 1, students learn about the mythology, Greek and Roman mythology, and maybe you have known about the Narcissus story. But if not, I can send you, and after reading it and after reading the novel, you can see the overlappings between this mythology and the novel. And you have to know about the Greek and Roman myths to be able to analyze well. So I will send you this story, then I will tell you about intermediality. I just want to make notes for myself to not to forget. Okay. And so Dorian is like Narcissus, and he falls in love with his own image, not anyone. His own image, and he is ultimately destroyed by it. Then let's talk about the characters. I have here 5 characters. The main of them is Dorian Grey, Basil Hallward, and Lord Henry. But Sybil Vane and James Vane, they are secondary characters, but also they have many connections between these main characters. So Dorian and his beauty are at the heart of this story. Dorian is a young, poor, and stunningly beautiful when the novel opens at the image Basil Hallward paints of him. Unlike the rest of humanity, however, Dorian stays forever young, while Basil's painting of him ages and shows signs of each immoral act Dorian commits. Dorian may be beautiful, but he is shallow, self-centered, and self-destructive. In Dorian, Wilde creates a complicated character portrait. Wilde cared greatly for beauty and argued for its needing no further justification. However, the portrait he paints of Dorian is actually quite repulsive. This man may be physically lovely, but he leaves a trail of broken hearts, ruined reputations, and dead bodies behind him. Dorian's name is important but ambiguous. His last name, Grey, suggests he is morally neither black nor white, or that he could be either black or white. His first name blends multiple possible meanings. The Dorians were a Hellenic people, and Doris was a sea nymph in Greek mythology. So you can see again you have Greek mythology elements, which would align with Dorian's beautiful mother and his own essentially supernatural beauty. In French, d'or would mean of gold or golden, which would also describe Dorian's great beauty. This name can also be read as a covert reference to a specific model of male relationship, so inverted male relationship between an older and young man, known as Greek or Dorian love. And the second character is Basil Hallward, is the second of the 5 characters of the novel. Basil is a mature man. He's an artist who is otherwise quite conventional, and he is concerned with reputation and good character, but also with creating and capturing beauty. Since he is the primary artist in the novel, the preface should be read as addressing him. Wilde opens his preface with "The artist is the creator of beautiful things." That's somewhat the case here. Basil does create a beautiful portrait of Dorian, but it's beautiful in part because Basil lets his worship of Dorian slip into the painting, and it doesn't remain beautiful. Only Dorian does. Does that mean Basil creates Dorian? It does, in part. But also, the good Dorian is made by Basil, but bad Dorian is made by Lord Henry. Just don't confuse it. And Dorian's... so it's up to another character to bring Dorian fully into being Henry Wotton, as I said before. So that self-contrasted, self-centered Dorian is made by Lord Henry. But poor, beautiful, handsome, and so kind Dorian is made by Basil. Lord Henry Wotton, early in his preface to this novel, he says the critic is he who can translate into another manner or a new material his impression of beautiful things. So it's by Oscar Wilde himself. If that's the case, Lord Henry is, among other things, a critic. Where Basil paints but does not necessarily explain his art, Henry explains beauty, art and life in a way that fundamentally changed Dorian. Basil may capture Dorian's beauty on canvas, but it's Henry who explains what it means in a way that awakens Dorian to its significance. Henry is also a cynic and a dandy. He lives with his life on display to the world for pleasure, and he claims entirely by his own lights. About the three main characters in the novel, Oscar Wilde once wrote, Basil Hallward is what I think I am, Lord Henry what the world thinks me, and Dorian what I would like to be, in other ages perhaps. So I'm repeating. Oscar Wilde once wrote, Basil Hallward is what I think I am, Lord Henry what the world thinks me, and Dorian what I would like to be, in other ages perhaps. So the other character is Sybil Vane. She's an actress, and Sibyl's name is deeply symbolic. In ancient Greece, Sibyls were oracles at holy sites. The gods spoke through them. So again, you can see the mythological elements. Sybil Vane, however, is an actress, and the divinities who speak through her are human artists. She and Dorian are variations on the same idea. They are living art. Her last name has various meanings. She is very beautiful, and it would be appropriate for her to be Vane, but she's not. Instead, sadly, she lives in Vane, dying young as a result of her naivety and her complex relationship with her heart. And her blossoming love for Dorian moves her as the wind moves a weather vane, changing her view of life and thus her previously all-consuming dedication of her acting. Sybil is young and poor. She pours herself wholly into her acting because she desperately needs to escape her reality, and acting allows her to imagine a good life of herself. Once Dorian loves her, her performance suffers. She says it's because she no longer needs acting to escape in this way. If that's the case, readers might well wonder why Basil paints so very well. What is he escaping that he paints Dorian as well as he does? So you can find the answer of this question. And James Vane, Sybil Vane's brother, protective younger brother, and is also known as Jim. He distrusts the aristocratic suitor from Sybil and their mother, known as Prince Charming. He vows to kill the prince if he ever harms Sybil. James joins the navy and leaves for Australia just before Dorian drowns Sybil and before her death. Years later, James returns to England and embarks on a long search to find the man he considers responsible for his sister's death. By chance, he hears a woman refer to someone as Prince Charming, and he grabs hold of the man, who is Dorian, and intending to kill him. When Dorian points out that he is much too young to be the person James seeks, James is horror-struck and apologizes. And he then finds out that the seemingly young man is the culprit and somehow tracks Dorian to his country estate. Lying in wait to kill Dorian, James manages to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and is accidentally shot by one of Dorian's guests. James thus becomes the second person in his family to die violently through a connection to Dorian Grey. And in every scene, every jail that Dorian made, his portrait changing day by day. And we have here four main symbols. The painting, firstly, is a symbol. By far, the most important symbol is in the novel is Basil's portrait of Dorian. The centerpiece of the plot, the portrait interacts with Dorian throughout the narrative. When Dorian does something immoral, the results show up on the painting, while Dorian's own face stays unmarked and beautiful. This painting is Basil's best work, but must, because of its magical power, remain unseen by everyone except Dorian. So Basil and Henry saw the portrait when it was first complete. Though it's rarely seen, this picture looms symbolically and metaphorically over the entire book. The picture takes the Victorian ideal of art to its logical extreme. It also if art is useful because it teaches a moral lesson, how perfect must this painting be since it's an immediate barometer of ethical change. So Basil's final glimpse of his masterpiece occurs when he says that to know Dorian he must see his soul. This viewing proves to be the artist's undoing. His horrified reaction to the portrait leads Dorian to murder his friend because he didn't want anyone to know about this portrait. He was keeping it at the roof of the house and covering of it. And when Basil sees it, he was obliged to kill him because now Basil knows his secret, and that's why he killed him. The flowers, the second symbols. Though they are far less important than the picture, flowers appear throughout the book. The opening line mentions the rich odor of roses, and it's to flowers that Dorian turns in chapter 2 to relieve his soul after Henry awakens him to the power and brevity of beauty. And Dorian buys or orders orchids at key moments, such as when he is blackmailing Alan Campbell into disposing of Basil's body for him. Flowers symbolize beauty and how briefly it lasts. Their fleeting beauty stands in stark contrast to the enduring ugliness that is captured in Dorian's portrait. The title, character, clings to something that is not meant to last, which brings inevitable repercussions. And the other symbol is theater. The theater, as a type of art, serves as a form of escapism. Lord Henry advises that people should give in to temptation through indulgence, and Dorian uses art as one means of escaping the ethical concerns of his conscience. The theatre is the setting in which one of the characters of great importance to Dorian, Sybil Vane, is primarily seen. It is the backdrop against which she artistically plays the characters that seduce Dorian into loving her. And once she and Dorian fall in love, it's the setting in which Sybil no longer able to act. So it's the place of Dorian's indulgence while Sybil's performance excel, and it's the place he rejects when Sybil's performances are no longer pleasing. The theatre also symbolizes the way all the main characters play roles in their own personal dramas. And the last symbol is the yellow book. In chapter 10, just after Dorian hides his portrait and learns the results of Sybil Vane's inquest, he reads the yellow book Henry sent him. This novel changed Dorian's life. He buys multiple copies, rereads it, and lives its philosophy. This book, which he carries with him wherever he goes, symbolizes several closely linked meanings. Most directly, it represents Henry's influence over Dorian, and generally, controversial French novels were bound in yellow during this period. So this book represents the influence of French literature. And these yellow-bound books were considered sensational at best and decadent and immoral at worst, promoting both intimacy and philosophical divinance. Most specifically, this can be read as Joris Karl Huysmans' Rebirth, a book of the decadent movement that Wilde read on his honeymoon. Once this book enters Dorian's life, he begins to live like he is part of the aesthetic movement, and he is much more hedonistic. It also provides a means by which Dorian can practice Henry's belief about curing the soul by means of the senses and the senses by means of the soul. So, let's talk about motifs. I'm sorry, I don't know if it's recording or not, or almost 40 minutes. Okay, so we have several motifs here, but I chose 3 of them: the picture of Dorian Grey, inverted male relationship, and the color white. The picture of Dorian Grey, the most magical of mirrors, shows Dorian the physical burdens of age and sin from which he has been spared. For a time, Dorian sets his conscience aside and lives his life according to a single goal, achieving pleasure, and his painted image, however, asserts itself as his conscience and haunts him with the knowledge of his crimes. There he sees the cruelty he showed to Sybil Vane and the blood he spilled killing Basil Hallward. And the second motive is inverted male relationship. This relationship bonds between men play a large role in structuring the novel. Basil's painting depends upon his adoration of Dorian's beauty, and similarly, Lord Henry is overcome with the desire to seduce Dorian and mold him into the realization of the type. So, this relationship between men fits into Wilde's larger aesthetic values, for it returns him to antiquity, where an appreciation of youth and beauty was not only fundamental to culture, but also expressed as a physical relationship between men. So, as an inverted relationship between males, so such kind of living in an intolerant society, Wilde asserted this philosophy partially in an attempt to justify his own lifestyle. And for Wilde, this relationship was not a sordid vice, but rather a sign of refined culture. As he claimed rather romantically during his trial for gross indecency between men, and the affection between an older and younger man places one in the tradition of Plato, Michelangelo, and Shakespeare. And the last motive is the color white. Interestingly, Dorian's trajectory from figure of innocence to figure of degradation can be charted by Wilde's use of the color white. White usually connotes innocence and blackness, and as it does when Dorian is first introduced, it's in fact the white purity of Dorian's boyhood that Lord Henry finds so captivating. And Basil invokes whiteness when he learns that Dorian has sacrificed his innocence, and as the artist stares in horror at the ruined portrait, he quotes a biblical verse from the book of Esau. Though your sins be as scarlet, yet I will make them as white as snow. But the days of Dorian's innocence are over. Its equality he now issues, and Tellingly, when he orders flowers, he demands as few white ones as possible. When the color appears again in the form of James Wayne's face, like a white handkerchief, peering in through a window, it has been transformed from the color of innocence to the color of death. It's this threatening pall that makes Dorian long at the novel's ends and for his rose-white boyhood. But the hope isn't vain, but he proves unable to wash away the stains of his sins. And literary elements. The type of work is a novel, and genre is Gothic philosophical comedy of manners. Point of view. The tone is Gothic. The point of view is third-person omniscient. The narrator chronicles both the objective of external world and the subjective of internal thoughts and feelings of the characters. There is one short paragraph where a first-person point of view becomes apparent. In this section, Wilde becomes the narrator. And tone is Gothic, dark, supernatural, sardonic, and comedic. And tense is past, of course. And the setting is in 1890s. And protagonist is Dorian Grey. And the major conflict is Dorian Grey, having promised his soul in order to live a life of perpetual use, must try to reconcile himself to the bodily decay and dissipation that are accorded to his portrait. Rising action. Dorian notices the change in his portrait after ending his affair with Sybil Vane. He commits himself wholly to the Yellow Book and indulges his fancy without regard for his reputation. The discrepancy between his outer purity and his inner depravity surges. And climax when Dorian kills Basil Hallward. And falling action, Dorian descends into London's opium dens. He attempts to express remorse to Lord Henry, and he stabs his portrait, thereby killing himself. Foreshadowing the illegitimacy of Sybil and James, as well as Sybil's portrayal of Juliet from Shakespeare's tragedy Romeo and Juliet, foreshadow the doomed nature of Sybil's relationship with Dorian Gray. And above the title, the picture of Dorian Gray has a double meaning. It refers to the magical portrait reflecting Dorian's darker actions, and also to the novel itself, which provides a fuller picture of Dorian. Then let's analyze quotes. The first quote is, "All art is quite useless," by Oscar Wilde in the preface. This final line in Oscar Wilde's preface to this novel concludes a brief but dense treatise on the nature of art, beauty, and criticism. Wilde does not say he is committing to the picture of Dorian Gray, and indeed he is careful to speak broadly. He intentionally discusses art as such, beauty in general, and criticism as a practice, rather than tying his comments to this novel in particular. And nevertheless, the fact that he chose to include these points before readers begin the narrative cannot be ignored. In tone, style, and general reasoning, this preface is closest to the voice of Lord Henry Wotton, the cultured and cynical nobleman who awakens Dorian to the awareness of his own beauty in chapter 2. And so since Wilde did not do this, the reader must therefore apply them to the novel as a whole, including the character of Henry Lord. Do not, this line says, look for meaning of or influence from the novel. Instead, as an earlier section of the preface suggests, look for beauty, not the artificial things. So, quote 2, Lord Henry. This quote is by Lord Henry. "There is no such thing as a good influence, Mr. Gray. all influence is immoral from the scientific point of view. So Lord Henry says this to Dorian Gray during their extended first meeting at Basil Hallward's studio. It reveals some of Henry's quite complex attitudes toward life, part of which involves treating one's own life as a work of art and approaching it objectively and aesthetically. So the paradox comes from the fact that Henry influences Dorian on a fundamental level, and Henry awakens Dorian to the awareness of his own beauty and to how fast life passes. Henry also continually postures and shares his philosophy with others, which shows he is continually seeking influence. And the third quote is by Dorian Gray in chapter 2. And I'm jealous of the portrait you have painted of me. Every moment that passes takes something from me and gives something to it. Oh, if it were only the other way. If the picture could change and I could be always what I am now. So, the part of a larger emotional outburst to Lord Henry Wotton and Basil Hallward, Dorian's flood of words comes after Henry has awakened Dorian to the power and intensity of his own beauty, which is also when Dorian becomes aware of how short life is and how soon his youthful beauty will fade. This intense prayer is much more straightforward than most of Henry's speeches in the novel, and this indicates how much simpler and straightforward Dorian's character is than his older friend at this time. And this prayer serves as a prediction of how the novel ends, and when the beautiful painting of young Dorian seems to mock the aged, dead Dorian. And the fourth quote is by Lord Henry. Nowadays, people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. The line is one of Wilde's famous epigrams. It appears in this novel when Lord Henry Wotton is talking to Dorian Gray, but it often appears free from its context, a kind of generalized clinical observation about value. So, in context, the meaning is more complex. Henry isn't home, and his wife, referred to as Lady Henry, is speaking to Dorian, and she's quite nervous, and it seems to be because of Henry's relationship with Dorian. When Henry does come home, he says he just spent hours haggling over the price of a brocade. Since he has money, Henry is choosing to do his bargaining rather than spend time with his wife or friend. In context, it's clearly Henry who knows the price of things but not the value. And fifth quote, again by Dorian. Yes, you have killed my love. You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity. I will never think of you. I will never mention your name. Dorian Gray delivers these heartful lines in an epic rant to Sybil Vane backstage after he has brought Lord Henry Wotton and Basil to see Sybil act. When Dorian first fell for Sybil, it was because she was beautiful and because she could act so well. Now that she is in love, her performance has suffered, and she tells him it's because she is in love that she can't act, that she used to act so well to escape a joyless life. She wholeheartedly believed in her theatrical roles and immersed herself in them fully. Now that she has Dorian's love, she sees only the artificiality of the theater, and so she can't act. So this extended speech is Dorian's response to Sybil. Like many aspects of this novel, it's multifaceted. So here Dorian confesses that he likes artificial things, not natural things, like his own appearance on himself. And the last quote is by narrator. so you can read it. It's too long, I don't want to waste time. This description indicates that the fairy tale element of the story has run its course. All of the years and scenes that had been transferred to the portrait are suddenly transferred back to Dorian in the instant he stabs the painting. The description is intentionally nameless. The servants who view these tableaux see the beautiful painting and their master's writings on the aged corpse and thus deduce the reality. It's worth nothing that when Dorian stabbed the painting, Wilde did not say where he stabbed it. And however, the knife is in the dead man's heart, indicating the painting was his heart. This aligns with Dorian's comments from chapter 12 about keeping a diary of his life locked in a room. This painting was his diary, his heart and his inner self. And this is the end. It makes me feel sad to see that it's our last lecture, but I think that I hope that we will meet in the next term. And I hope that you enjoyed this video lesson and this PPT, and also I hope that you will enjoy when you read this text, read this novel. Even you can watch the film, and but don't rely on the film, because I will not give you the exam questions according to the film. I will give you questions according to the novel and this video lesson. Try to read the novel originally and try to analyze it according to your own approach. And I hope that you will be well prepared for your exam, and I wish you good luck during your exams, and take care of yourselves. I hope to see you again. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.